She crossed a frozen harbor for a bookkeeping job.
Oh, child.
The man
Don't
waiting on the
sail with
dock
the morning
didn't need a
tide.
bookkeeper. He needed a wife, willing to live where the sea tried to break the windows every night. By the time Nora Whitfield stepped off the mail boat in Gulls Crossing, Maine, her boots were soaked through, her fingers were numb, and the folded newspaper ad in her glove felt like the last thin thread holding her life together. It promised steady work at Breaker Point Light, room, board, wages. After months of sewing for pennies, copying letters from men who never paid on time, and hearing her mother say a plain-faced woman had better learn to be useful if she wanted to survive, Nora had taken the only chance left. She was 27, broad-shouldered, soft around the middle, and tired of being looked at like a compromise no one wanted to make. So she stopped hoping to be chosen. Work was simpler than hope. Work did not laugh behind gloved hands. The harbor office sat beside the wharf, windows rattling in the sleet. Nora stepped inside and found a narrow man in spectacles warming his ink-stained fingers near the stove. "I'm here about the bookkeeping post," she said, "from the Portland paper." The clerk looked up, and the sympathy in his face made her stomach go cold before the wind ever could. "Miss Whitfield," he said carefully, "there's been a misrepresentation." That one word nearly knocked the breath out of her. She had one silver coin, a comb with 3 broken teeth, and no bed for the night. "What kind of misrepresentation?" Before he could answer, the office door flew wide, and a gust of sleet came in with a tall man in a dark oilskin coat. He carried the weather in with him. Salt, iron, cold. He was somewhere past 40, built like someone who trusted rope, stone, and his own 2 hands more than he trusted people. Dark hair, gray at the temples, eyes the hard gray blue of winter surf. "This is her?" he asked. The clerk nodded. "Mr. Reed was just—" "I'll tell her myself." Outside, the harbor was turning black under the evening sky. Elias Reed stopped at the end of the dock and faced her squarely. "The advertisement was false," he said. "There is no bookkeeping position." Nora stared at him. "Then why am I here?" "Because I need a wife." The harbor seemed to drop away beneath her. "You lied to me." "Yes." The answer came so clean it left no room for comfort. Anger rose first, then humiliation. Then the harder thing underneath both of them, fear. "I spent my last money getting here." "I know," Elias said, "and I'll pay your fare anywhere you want to go, plus enough for a room tonight and food for the road. But before you refuse, hear the whole of it." He kept Breaker Point light. The station had a cottage, stores, and work enough for 2 steady people. He said advertising for a wife brought mockery, or women who wanted a seaside postcard and panicked the first week a storm locked the island down. He needed a lawful marriage, a real partner, someone practical, someone who understood that a home could be built before love ever decided to visit. Nora laughed once, but there was no humor in it. "And you looked at a woman desperate enough to cross a frozen harbor alone and thought she might be desperate enough to marry a stranger." "No," he said quietly. "I looked at a woman who crossed a frozen harbor alone and thought she might be stronger than most." That landed where anger could not reach. Still, she lifted her chin. "I won't be purchased. I won't be trapped on some rock because you decided loneliness gave you the right to trick me." "You won't," Elias said. "If you leave in the morning, I pay your way. If you stay the night first, You sleep in the spare room, eat a hot meal, and decide after daylight. If you ever agreed to anything beyond that, it would be in writing, before a minister, and on terms fair to you. The wind cut sharper across the dock. Without ceremony, he took off his heavy coat and laid it over her shoulders. "Whatever you think of me," he said, "you're freezing." The cottage at Breaker Point glowed amber against a world of slate sea and white spray. Elias rowed her across the channel himself, while the beam above them turned slow and watchful through the storm. Inside, the keeper's house was plain, warm, and built for weather, not display. Pegs by the door, boots lined like soldiers, a table scarred by years of hard use. Nothing delicate, nothing false. At supper he served haddock chowder, dark bread, and tea strong enough to wake the dead. They ate while the lamp hissed softly between them, and the wind battered the cottage walls. "Why now?" Nora asked at last. "Why a wife? And why through a lie?" Elias turned the teacup once between his hands. "My mother kept this station with my father until he died," he said. "Then I kept it with her until she was buried 3 winters ago. Since then it's been me, the stairs, the lens, the weather, and too much empty silence." He looked up. "The town thinks I want some bright little thing to soften the place. I don't. I want someone steady, someone who knows a hard life is still a life." And then he gave her the ugliest truth of all. The lie was because the truth brought no one. By morning the storm had passed. The sea still roared, but the sky was hard blue, and the whole point looked stark and magnificent. Elias showed her everything: the lamp room with its brilliant lens and brasswork, the storeroom with oil, wicks, and polished tools, the signal flags, the hens in their wind-braced coop, the path worn into the rock by weather and repetition. He didn't romanticize any of it. "In January, the ice gets into the hinges," he told her. "In March, the fog makes people foolish. In autumn, the gales try to tear the shutters off. If someone falls on the outer steps during a storm, prayer gets there before help does." Nora looked out at the sea. It should have frightened her straight back to the mainland. Instead, she felt the first strange flicker of wanting something she had not allowed herself in years. Not rescue, belonging. "I'll consider a trial," she said slowly. 6 months, legal marriage, separate rooms, separate trunks, mutual respect, and no claims beyond what we both freely choose. If either of us wants out at the end, you fund my next step, and we end it without ugliness." Elias held out his hand at once. "Done." They married 4 days later in a tiny church near the harbor. Nora wore her best brown dress. Elias wore a black coat that fit his shoulders badly and his seriousness too well. He did not promise romance. He promised, "I will deal honestly with you from this day forward." Nora had heard prettier vows, none that felt safer. The first weeks laid down the shape of their life. Nora brought order to cupboards, balanced the supply accounts, and learned to climb the lighthouse stairs without losing her breath. Elias kept the lamp, repaired the shutters, managed deliveries, and came in from the weather with his beard wet and his hands red from rope. They spoke first about chores, then about books, then about the ugly little dog Nora had loved as a girl, then about the brother Elias had buried at sea, then about Nora's mother, who spoke of beauty as if it were a moral achievement, and plainness as if it were a sin. One evening, while Nora copied inventory totals by lamplight, Elias said, "You look happiest when you're figuring something out." Nora didn't glance up. "That's a practical compliment." "It's the sort I trust." Something warm and dangerous moved low in her chest. Winter settled deeper around Breaker Point, and so did their ease with each other. When Nora burned her hand on the stove, Elias wrapped it as if pain deserved patience. When an inspection letter left him in one of his rare dark silences, Nora sat beside him until he admitted he still heard his father's voice every time he made a mistake at the light. When the world shrank to rock, wind, and white water, they played cribbage by the fire and laughed hard enough to fog the lamp glass. By the third month, Nora had memorized the rhythm of his footsteps on the stair. By the fourth, Elias could read her moods by the way she tied her apron. Neither of them named what was growing. Then came the March nor'easter. It hit after midnight with the force of a train. The whole tower shuddered. The beam wavered once, and Elias was already pulling on his boots before Nora had fully opened her eyes. "Lens shutters," he said. "Stay by the lamp." Rain struck sideways. The tower shook under every gust. Nora fed the flame, checked the clockwork, listened to the storm hammer the glass. Then she heard it. A sound too heavy to be wind. A human cry, cut short. Nora ran. At the outer gallery door, rain hit her so hard she could barely breathe. Elias was half down the iron stairs, one hand locked around the rail, the other hanging useless at his side. A shutter chain had snapped loose and whipped across the catwalk. Blood darkened his sleeve. One wrong step and the sea would take him. "Nora!" he shouted over the gale. "Get back inside!" She did the opposite. By the time she reached him, she was drenched, shaking, and furious enough to be stronger than fear. She wedged her shoulder beneath his, dragged the broken chain clear with both hands, and hauled him inch by inch back through the door. The moment they crashed into the stairwell, Elias sagged against the wall, pale beneath the rain. "The light," he said. Nora looked up the endless spiral, and understood all at once what the marriage had become. Not paper, not pity, not an arrangement waiting politely for time to expire. This man had handed her dignity when the world had handed her none, and now the sea was asking what she would do with it. She kissed his forehead once, quick, terrified, instinctive, and ran for the lamp room. All night she climbed, wound, trimmed, polished, and prayed. She fought the wind, the failing chain, the blur of rain on the glass, and the old voice in her head whispering, "You are not enough for this." By dawn, the storm had broken. The beam had never gone dark. A freighter captain later said that light kept his ship off Widow's Reef by less than a minute. Nora accepted the praise with salt-stiff hair, blistered hands, and a strange new steadiness in her spine. Elias watched her as though the world had shifted on its axis, and he had just noticed who was holding it in place. After the storm, something in him opened. Not all at once, not theatrically, in pieces. He left the warm side of the stove for her before she asked. He brought her sea glass from the path because once, in passing, she had said the green pieces looked like old bottle dreams polished into mercy. He trusted her with the logbook. He slept easier. But the 6-month mark crept closer with the spring thaw, and then a letter arrived from Nora's cousin in Portland, offering her a respectable clerkship and a room above a milliner's shop. She read it twice and couldn't decide what hurt more, that she no longer wanted the escape she once begged heaven for, or that Elias never asked her to stay. Instead, he grew careful. Too careful. One evening he laid a folded ticket on the table beside the letter. "Steamer to Portland," he said. "Open date. If that's the life you want, you should have the chance." Nora stared at it. "What do you want?" she asked. Elias looked toward the dark window, not at her. One that doesn't keep you because you had no better option. The truth of that was so painfully decent it nearly broke her heart. "Elias," she said, "do you still think I'm here because I had nowhere else to go?" He turned then, and every unspoken thing of the past months seemed to stand between them. "I think," he said carefully, "that I began this by asking for duty, and somehow ended up wanting what I have no right to demand." Nora crossed the room before fear could stop her. "You never had to demand it," she whispered. She had spent so much of her life believing affection belonged to other women, smaller women, smoother women, women welcomed like spring. But here, in a wind-battered cottage on the edge of the Atlantic, a man was looking at her as if she were the one thing in the world he dared not lose. "When I came here," she said, "I thought usefulness was the best I could hope for. Then you looked at me like steadiness was something beautiful. You gave me room to stand. You let me become more than the worst things I had been told about myself." Her voice shook. "So no, I'm not staying because I'm trapped. I'm staying because I love you." For one long second, Elias did not move. Then he crossed the last inch between them, cupped her face with a hand made careful by weather, and kissed her like a man who had gone thirsty for years without admitting he was dying of it. It was relief, reverence, hunger, home. Nora laughed through tears when they finally drew breath. "That," Elias said, forehead against hers, "is the first dishonest thing I've done since the wedding, because I have wanted to do that since the night you beat the sea and kept the light alive." She smiled. "Then I forgive the delay." That evening she carried her valise across the hall to his room. Neither of them pretended not to understand what that meant. Spring came green and silver to Breaker Point. The hens grew louder. Supply boats came easier. Nora planted thyme and onions while Elias rebuilt the outer rail where the March storm had split it. Sometimes they worked in silence. Sometimes they argued over nonsense. Sometimes she caught him watching her with that same astonished gratitude, as if love had arrived not like lightning, but like a lamp steadily brightening a room he had forgotten could be warm. By summer, people in Gull's Crossing no longer called Nora the woman from the advertisement. They called her Mrs. Reed. Not because a ring had changed her worth, but because she had claimed her place so completely, the whole harbor had to learn her name all over again. On soft evenings they climbed to the gallery and watched the sun sink red into the Atlantic, while the lens behind them waited for dark. "No regrets?" Elias asked her once. Nora leaned into him and thought of the girl who had stepped off the mailboat with wet boots, one coin, and a future as thin as newspaper. "Only one," she said. "What's that?" "That I almost took the next boat out." He laughed, low and disbelieving, and kissed the top of her head while the first evening star opened over the water. Some loves arrive like a promise. Theirs arrived like shelter. Not sudden, not easy, not dressed in pretty illusions. It was built out of truth told badly at first, then better. Out of work shared fairly, out of fear survived together, out of the quiet miracle of being seen clearly and wanted anyway. And in the end, that was stronger than any storm that ever came for the light.